Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Ginger Nash, and I'm here with my partner in Feminology, Dr. Tara Nyack. We wanted to come and have a little conversation with you today. We actually tried to do a Facebook Live where we could both be on it last week, but technical difficulties prevented us from doing that. So I'm so glad that everyone is enjoying the posts that we are making in Feminology, and we wanted to give you a little bit of a background today of how we met and through what context, and talk a little bit about something that's close to both Dr. Tara and my hearts, which is genomic medicine and the idea of personalized treatment. So about 10 days ago, not this past Memorial Day weekend, but the weekend before, Tara and I were at the training with Dr. Peter D'Adamo, the originator of this amazing piece of software called Opus 23. And this is how Tara and I first met 2 years ago, right? 2016, yeah. And so this is the way that we met each other, because we share a mentor in Dr. D'Adamo. And he is on the cutting edge, to say the least. He's more like 20 years in the future, not really on the cutting edge of medicine, which is always what I like to say to him. And he takes that compliment well, that I call him the David Bowie of naturopathic medicine. But as naturopaths, as both Dr. Tara and I are naturopathic physicians, we are always interested in the holistic view of health, right? And you can go in kind of either direction with this. And I think this is something that we're trying to accomplish with the work in Feminology, because sometimes we're pulling out and we're looking at the real macro view. Like I just made a post about the full moon in Sagittarius yesterday. And now we're going to go into a deeper perspective into genomic medicine, which obviously has to do with the cellular level and how we can help women and men, but certainly this group is geared toward women's health, how we can help women manage their health by looking at some of these genomic aspects of a person. So this is an incredibly complex field, right, Tara? We could spend hours talking about any number of issues. Tara does have a background in biology and in genetics and genomics. And Tara, you want to tell us a little bit about your background in that work, or?
Sure. This is such a relatively new field of science. And I hear a lot of people saying, well, we don't know enough yet. So one of the first things I love to mention about genomic medicine is that we don't know enough, but we're the doctors that are giving it a shot and using everything that we do know that is clinically relevant and that can guide us in any way. My background in genetics really just started with a love of it back at Temple University. And when I took courses, you have to select electives, and every elective I took was in genetics because it fascinated me. And actually it was very new back then when I was in college. Back in 2008, I took the first epigenetics course ever offered at Temple University with the very first textbook ever written about epigenetics. And we've come a really, really long way since then. Just in the framework of dealing with health in general, I just look at genomics as more data on our patient and lasting data versus smoking gun. We're not always looking for exactly the pinpoint of what exactly is wrong, but we're looking for more information to further guide us to be the most individualized that we possibly can be in 2018. And I'm sure in 2028, we're going to look like, we were in the Stone Age back,
Yeah. So one of the things I always like to tell people that maybe aren't that familiar with the whole notion of the difference between genetics and epigenetics is that the genetics, if you think of it like a blueprint for who we are, right? Our DNA has a certain blueprint, and then epigenetics is the science of the way that blueprint is interpreted. So the way the genes are turned on or off based on different environmental cues. So this is why we look at things that go back even to when we were in our mother's wombs, because a lot of the sculpting of the epigenetics, the way the genes are going to play out in terms of our health trajectory, happens in early development in our bodies. But of course, one of the things that is so wonderful for us as naturopathic physicians and our focus on nutrition is that nutrition is one of the best ways to fiddle with the settings on the genes and try to help, you know, the blueprint be the healthiest version of you, which is really a combination of how your genes are interpreted by all kinds of things in the environment, and even things beyond nutrition, like, you know, experiences, traumas, pathogens that you're exposed to, certain, you know, types of information that we get, allergens, all types of things that we interface with the outside world can help shift and sculpt this epigenetic landscape that we each have. So this is a term that's thrown around a lot now, right? Everybody's talking about epigenetics. I just saw a summit. There's a new online summit all about epigenetics with some anti-aging institute. So it's really cool that you've been studying this as long as you have, because there is new research coming out all the time. And, you know, there are certain areas, right, that have a lot more research behind it than others. And our job is to really figure out what is most important for any given patient, right? So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And really just overlaying, you know, being a doctor, because the newest research, or most recently, shows that there are so many epigenetic modifications that are actually inherited. So it goes back all the way to your grandmother, or, you know, and most of us have grandparents that lived through some pretty hard times. So the whole original idea of epigenetics is sort of all falling on your shoulders and being this completely harnessable thing. It's kind of faded into this more of an idea of learning how to best play the cards that you've been dealt. And we see all the time when we have people come in and we do their opus, we analyze their whole genome. There are tons of genes that would indicate, for example, that someone might be obese, and it's just something that they've never struggled with in their life. And so because the typical genomic or whole genome sequencing tests that we're analyzing really only measure the blueprint, as you mentioned, we get to see epigenetics at play right from the start.
Right. And some research suggests that it's even 7 generations, right? So, I mean, if we're talking about transgenerational medicine, we're looking at the kinds of things that may not be even locked in the genes, but sort of the way we've inherited certain epigenetic parameters can affect our health. And this is why a lot of people say, like, you know, oh, diabetes runs in my family, or cancer runs in my family. Well, there isn't 1 or 2 or sometimes even 15 or 20 genes that will make you get diabetes or give you cancer. It's such a complex interplay of various different genes, and then the environment in which those genes are becoming a reality, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the difference. I mean, just having been, you know, I was Dr. D's resident when he unveiled Opus. And so I've been working with the program since he released it. And one of the things that I think is unique about using Opus 23 and why we continue to go and learn from Dr. D is because it's one of the only programs that actually considers gene-gene interactions, where the product of one gene actually influences the function of another gene. So right now, genetics, genomics, all of these tests are kind of like a fad, and they're really hot. I actually looked it up for a course that I'm teaching at Maryland University of Integrative Health, and in having the students do a project, we found 97 different companies that you can put your raw data in from 23andMe to analyze. And I had the students compare, you know, these analysis programs, and some of them are really just looking at 14 genes and then giving you a report from that. And Opus is really, you know, one of the critiques that people have about it is that it's so overwhelming and it's so complex. But it's really the only program that's considering all facets that are known to us at this point.
Yeah. And also the program not only looks at way more genes and SNPs on genes, which is really what Opus is interested in, a SNP being a single nucleotide polymorphism, which is a minor change in the DNA sequence that doesn't lead to a full-blown genetic disease, but have been studied more or less in different situations to predict certain types of health outcomes. But the thing that I get so jazzed about with the Opus program, and why I think it's so phenomenal that we have one that was created by a naturopathic physician, is that it has the natural agents curated into the program as well. So it's not going to do just like what Dr. Tara just said, look at gene to gene interactions, which are really important, but it's also going to tell us any information or research out there around natural agents being foods or nutraceuticals, nutrients, herbal medicines, anything that's been studied to show that any of these products have an effect on the genetic expression. That's, in my experience, the only program that really offers a lot of information about the natural aspects of working with genomics. And
it also allows us to be so nitpicky and just pinpoint precise, because some of the things that are recommended through Opus, for example, are things that every naturopath, maybe even every health coach, health food store owner would recommend. For example, like a simple B complex, something that most of us know something about in the health conscious world. But when you do something that's genomically targeted, you're finding the exact form of the vitamin, of the nutrient that's the best for this specific person, taking into account everything that we know about them. You can't, at this point, you cannot get more precise than that.
Right. Like the best example is, I'll use myself. I cannot take a methylated form of B vitamins, of B12. I have a particular set of genetic SNPs that prevent me from being able to metabolize a lot of that methylated B. So I don't take that form of B. And I had a new patient last week who came in actually for a diet appointment, and she was looking at the supplements that I have here in the office. And she was like, oh, what is this B vitamin you have? Why don't you use methyl B? Like everybody wants methyl B. Methylation is another hot word, which has to do with the major mechanism of epigenetics. Methylation is a verb, really, and it's the way that the genes are expressed or suppressed is through two major mechanisms, the biggest one being methylation. So Tara, tell me a little bit about women's health in particular, since that's what we have here in our Feminology group, is women that are interested in balancing their hormones and preventing all kinds of gynecological related suffering. So when you're looking at the genomics of a woman who's got a lot of pathology in the female hormone system, or in, fibroids, for example, or thyroid issues, what kinds of things do you look at with the Opus program?
Yeah. So, every woman typically wants to know about her BRCA mutations, because that's one of the earliest big, just widely publicized. It's in the news. Women know about that. That's one of the first genes that was really flashed across our minds.
And for good reason, right?
Absolutely.
It's a very important.
So most women want to know that. So when I'm creating a report for a woman, it's one of the first things that I include just for informational purposes. But, I look at all of the cancer risk factors specifically for the reproductive system, and I go through all of those algorithms, those combined gene interactions that give you some predisposition or sometimes a benefit, like a lower risk. Mm-hmm. And so I usually include all of those risks and then go through it with the patient and say, look, these genes give you an increased risk of cancer, but look, these different sets of genes give you a decreased risk of cancer. Not that they cancel each other out, but we're just kind of collecting data and flagging it. Well, that's kind of a yellow flag. That's a red flag. I'm not too worried about that because you live a certain type of lifestyle and you have no family history there, et cetera. So I start looking at risks, but then depending on what the woman's going through, I dig deeper. And in the realm of hormones, we're thinking about synthesis, we're thinking about metabolism, we're thinking about the receptors for all of the hormones. We're thinking about interaction.
So the way the hormones are actually functioning in the body. So
absolutely. And the way that the body's clearing them.
Yeah. Making the hormones, breaking them down, how they're affecting all the various tissues that they can act on in the body. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And we're often, I mean, you and I have done it before, where we're looking at specific tissue and looking at which genes are most highly expressed in those tissues. And sometimes you find, you're really surprised to find
absolutely.
that there's a bunch of estrogen receptors in the brain. And, I mean, that's not huge news, but sometimes when it's stratified for you, you find things that you hadn't thought of before.
Absolutely.
So we look at that and we look at, when I'm looking at somebody's detoxification pathways, certainly I'm looking to improve the areas where they might not be functioning as optimally as we'd like. But I'm also looking at the places where we really are functioning optimally in terms of, cancer prevention, detoxification. And if it makes sense for the system, we can really push those well-functioning,
those strong pathways, right.
pathways that don't have any glitches, we can rely on as we work to support the pathways that may have a couple of kinks to be worked out. And we typically do it with nutrition and herbal or nutrient supplementation. Right.
It's also got a whole section that tells you what foods are going to be most beneficial and most detrimental based on a sort of a wide pass of all of the genetic information that's in the program. And then, of course, so many women have thyroid issues. There's a whole section on thyroid hormone metabolism as well, and risk for autoimmune disease with women with Hashimoto's and that type of thing. So yeah, it's almost like I can understand why, many practitioners are like, this is overwhelming. I mean, I myself, I have only done now about 25 of these genomic analysis, and I can easily spend 6 hours just gone. So you have to really think about what you want to focus on, and for certainly there's lots of different ways you can go. But one of the things that Dr. Diadamo said at the training a couple of weeks ago, which has really stuck with me, was that line, it's like having a book about yourself that you'll never stop reading, because it's so much data, it's so much information, and there's new research coming out all the time. So, it's not necessarily, and we've talked about this, both Tara and I, it's not necessarily the first thing we do with patients, because there's a lot of times places you want to start cleaning up the diet, just doing some basic drainage and improving eliminations. But certainly with certain scenarios, certain pathologies, and people that have certain family histories, strong family histories of certain disease processes, it's an incredible way to really investigate some of the things that we can do. So,
yeah. And I also think, it's important to mention that this isn't a test that ever changes. It's not like lab values that we test and retest. The point is, this data stands. And if you come up, 2 years later with something that we hadn't anticipated, or that you want to delve into deeper, the data is the same. It does not change. So, the initial investment, which is minimal for a lifelong reference to your health, I think is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll save another big piece of this work, which is looking at how the DNA of the bacteria in your gut, called the microbiome, interact with your genes, for another conversation. But that is absolutely, and that's one of Tara's favorite topics, is looking at the way the genes that interact with the bacteria in your gut, which is pretty cool, because then you get a whole nother, for us, again, as naturopaths who are always focused on digestive health and gut health, and there's probably no other topic in medicine right now that has more research being done on it than the microbiome. So we can talk a little bit more about that next time. But thank you, Dr. Tara, for sharing some of your wisdom. And I will be posting some information about this kind of testing and how the process actually works. So if you're interested, let us know. Or if you have some simple questions about what we've talked about today in this video, please, please, please post them in the group and we will answer them as best we can. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody.